few years ago, a friend took over running an old local pub, and as such, always offered us a roof over our head whenever we were in town. This pub was originally a 17th century coach stop, and so has a bit of history to it. Myself and my wife had been out most of the night, and had one or too many. We decided to crash out for the night, and left the group we were with downstairs in the bar. I sunk straight out to sleep, but the next thing I knew was that there was a very loud banging coming from the radiator. I'm not just talking about a banging, I mean a banging. Unfortunately, this upset my wife, who decided to cling to my back, and so brought me to, but not in a good mood, as I'm sure you can imagine. "What's that noise?" she said. "Just an old central heating system. Go back to sleep," replied I. A bit unconvinced, she settled down to sleep. Just then, the duvet flew away from the bed, or nearly. I caught the corner of it, still being 99% drunk, shouted "piss off," wrapped the duvet around me, and crashed out again. The next morning, we talked about what had happened, and realized that no one could have pulled the covers away. After speaking to my friend, he told us that no one goes into that room, but he had put us in there to see if anything had happened. After having several staff walk out after various experiences, not too pleased, I went home, and still dwell on what could have happened if I hadn't had a few too many beers. As an aside, lately, the brewery has been refurbished, the pub, into an Irish-themed bar, totally destroying the character and feeling of the bar, and as far as I know, nothing has happened since. Sorry to have prated on a bit, but it is a genuine story, and I think worthy of contributing. Thanks for reading. The following story is not my own but my fiance's. I think I was around 13 when it started. Much of that time is very confused because I was in the classic situation for a poltergeist, an adolescent girl under great stress. I found over the years that when you say, "my mother was crazy," people don't envision quite the right things. However, when you say she didn't always know who I was when I came home from school and once called the police because the girl she didn't know wouldn't leave, they get a little more accurate idea that I'm not using the word crazy loosely. I can now recall exactly what happened now, but the usual things were stuff moving around, my bed shaking, and my clothes, only mine, getting knotted up in the hamper. Virtually everything that happened was confined to my room, except that the hamper was in the bathroom, and my sister later told me things sometimes moved from her desk, which was the other side of the wall. If film stayed in my room overnight, the pictures fogged. No interesting patterns, just murk. I woke up once to a lot of crunching and tearing. The next day, an entire magazine at each page pulled out and the pages wadded into little balls. Sometimes there would be a mumbling voice, no words that I could hear but definitely in the room with me. A couple times, the covers were jerked off of me. These sorts of things happened a couple times a week for several years. At first, I was completely terrified. I can remember lying in my bed as it bounced so hard I was nearly, but not quite thrown out, and sweating and crying. After a while, I began to feel that my fear was somehow feeding things, that the worse I felt, the more active and wild the poltergeist was. I started trying hard to control my fear. I was very into number theory in those days, and found that if I could call up a proof and start running through it, the activity would slow or even stop. If I was too scared to concentrate on that, even multiplication tables helped. A true number freak never forgets. After a year or so, things slowed down to a couple times a month, but continued happening fairly regularly. I think I was 16 when it ended. I woke up one night and my books were coming off of a high shelf and dropping to the floor, one by one. I'd never messed with my books before. I was furious. I said, "You leave me alone." I think I also told her to get out and leave me alone, but my memory is hazier about that. Anyway, there was a very odd feeling, like a whoosh directed towards the window, yet not a sound at all. And then the room was quiet. It felt empty. I went back to sleep. And that was it. No more waking up to find everything in my room moved around. No more being shaken awake in the middle of the night. No more clothes knotted up in the hamper, and film kept in my room came out as perfectly decent or terrible snapshots. Well, not quite completely it. Maybe a half dozen more times in the 30 years since, things have happened which I ascribe to the poltergeist. I still don't tell the story very often, out of a feeling that thinking about it might call it, whatever it is, back. I think I said some of this here a couple weeks back, though not in as much detail. Sure hope nothing moves in my room tonight. It is very startling to me that Eileen's poltergeist or whatever went away under such similar circumstances. I've also heard more classic stories in which a very firm but polite request to leave stopped the haunting. Thanks for reading. The following story is true. There were two of us who actually witnessed the first of 4 events that occurred within a 2-year period. Needless to say, we were both astounded. My friend's name is Roman, and this is what happened. I'm a computer lab teacher and had at the time of the incident an assistant named Roman. At about 10 a.m. in the morning, we had 2 off periods and were catching up on reports and just chatting. We were both side by side each other working on a computer. Having worked in agricultural research during my college years, I was a little knowledge in plant life, tree trimming, research, and all of that. While we were working, the topic of graphiting citrus trees came up. I don't recall why exactly, but Roman was curious about the subject and questioned me to the point where I even decided to draw a picture of the procedure for him. Now, mind you, I never have or never will claim that my classroom was haunted, but what happened next still baffles me to this day. As I explained the procedure, Roman abandoned our work temporarily and concentrated on the drawing before us. Just in front of my drawing was an empty soda can which I had drunk earlier. Without warning, the can lifted gently off the table in a smooth, slow, steady rise until it reached a little above eye level. The can froze for about 2 seconds and just dropped with a clang as it hit the table. The funny part was that I kept talking and explaining as this happened in front of us. I started stuttering when it finally hit me that something unusual had just happened to us. As if on cue, we both cried, "Did you see that?" Roman was under the impression that I had pulled some kind of stunt. We spent the rest of the morning trying to figure out what had caused the can to float, but nothing. It was aluminum and would not have responded to magnetic stimulus. We told our story in an excited manner to some of our fellow workers. Bad idea. Boy, did we get a load of one-liners. Hey, who you gonna call? Abbott and Costello to meet the Flying Coke can? We even got branded the Flying Burrito Brothers. I think it's in reference to some band or something. This story was not scary, just very unexplainable, and yes, it did happen. On a different date, as we were sitting on a desk working on the kids' computer points, we heard a rapping sound. I immediately followed the sound to the corner of the room and saw it. At the corner of the room is a flag holder, and since I didn't have a flag for it, I used it to hold its 3-foot rod with the hook at the end. I used it to adjust the air vents. Anyway, this rod somehow was pulled back almost horizontally and then just dropped. It continued to bounce until it just stopped. The last incident of mine occurred while I was in my classroom with the kids, working on computers with headphones on. Just then, there came a type of growl from the corner of the room. My assistant just froze and stared at me, and I back at him. Not one of my students heard. We sort of just whispered to each other, "Did you hear that?" And they answered, "No. Did you?" There was even a second incident that occurred that was slightly different than the first incident with the growl. In this instant, the growl sort of panned from one side of the room down the length and around to the back of the room. This time, practically all of my students heard the growl. I'll never forget these moments, and I apologize if this sounds kinda jumbly and I don't even know what I'm saying, but I promise, this all happened, and it's all really freaky to me. Thank you for reading. When I was around 6 years old, my mother and I moved into this house right off of Marion Drive, Portland, Oregon. The house was the biggest, most beautiful house I had ever seen. Please take into consideration that I was only 6 at the time. It was a 2-story, white 2-bedroom, 1-bath home. It had a spiral staircase that went up to the 2 rooms upstairs and had overlooked the living area. I don't quite recall when it all started, and my mother does not remember either, but we do remember all the things that took place in the year that we stayed there. Now, everything that I'm telling you, I don't have in any order, except for the final occurrence. One night, my mom and I were in the living room watching TV when we heard this very loud scratching on the side of the house, very persistent and very annoying, but we ignored it, and my mom dismissed it as a tree branch. The very next day I recall my mom mowing the lawn and stopping. She turned and looked at me and said, "There's no tree here." Another instance was even more alarming. When we moved into the house, there was a window that we had tried to open but couldn't, and mind you, we tried everything in the end, though we knew that there was no way it could have been opened. It had been painted and nailed shut. So I was watching TV one night, and my mom was somewhere, and we heard a loud kind of pounding and a whoosh. We looked around until we had discovered that somehow that the window was open. I had awful dreams there too, so much so that I only stayed in my room one night and the rest I stayed with my mom. Our dog Rebel would never come home. He would always stay at the neighbors, and even we tried to lock him in while we were gone. He would always be outside when we returned. The worst thing that ever happened that I can remember, and this is what finally convinced my mom to move, is when she sent me to her room to get undergarments. She had broke her arm, and the way she had her drawers set up was it had a large mirror on top with all her makeup and coffee and junk sitting there too. I open her top drawer and close it just like I always had, and the next thing I know, my mom screams and pushes me onto the bed as the mirror jumps out almost if it were trying to get to me. When we got up to look at the mess, we noticed that nothing had moved out of place on top of the dresser. Not her coffee or makeup or anything had budged. We moved soon after. Unfortunately, it didn't end there. I moved in with my dad about 4 years later to another house in Portland. I was around 10 at the time. This never did anything right out to hurt me. It just made me dream scary things and hear voices. I still dream about the darn house, and it still scares me. Now I live in a house that has a spirit. I'm not sure though. The only real things that happen is lights going on and off, pictures falling off the wall, and funny thing is, you can't keep a pair of slippers in that house for anything. We have went through about 10 pairs, and they just keep disappearing. Figure that one out. It always helps me to talk about this, and I hope that it will help others to know that they are not the only ones. I swore I was. Thanks for reading. My parents and partner were taking a vacation in Tasmania, which I later found out is renowned for its ghost stories, and decided to stay in a little old cottage that had been converted into a B&B, bed and breakfast. At first glance, the cottage looked perfect. 2 bedrooms, kitchen, living area, lounge, and bathroom with jacuzzi. A home away from home. We settled in, and I took a tour of the cottage. It all seemed okay, until I walked into the children's bedroom, which had 2 single beds and a walkthrough to an extension. I felt uncomfortable walking into the room, but dismissed my feelings as being silly. When I walked into the extension, what would have been a perfect little play area for children, I remember thinking what a good idea, but what I felt was overwhelmingly creepy. My hair stood on end, and I had to get out of there. I wanted to have a jacuzzi and relax before dinner. However, the most uninviting brown muddy water came out of the taps. I thought, it appears this jacuzzi doesn't get much use. I'll let it run for a while till the pipes clear. The pipes didn't clear. In fact, they got worse. By that stage, there were leaves and dead insects coming out. It was disgusting. I got the clear sense that I was not welcome there, so I turned the taps off and decided not to have a jacuzzi. That night, we all went out for dinner before returning to our cold stone cottage. We decided to go straight to bed and warm ourselves under the covers. My partner and I stayed in the children's bedroom. I took the single bed furthest away from the eerie extension. I remember climbing into the crisp, cool sheets and curling into a ball before falling asleep. In the middle of the night, I woke up feeling hot. Boiling hot. I was sweating, my skin was burning, and I was overcome with the overbearing intense heat. I was delirious and tried to locate the source of the heat. It was like touching an oven door with ineffective gloves on. Why is the bed so hot, I thought, and turned on the bedside lamp to investigate. Under the bed, there was a cord leading to the control switch for an electric blanket. It was on 3, the highest setting. That's weird. Who turned the electric blanket on? I asked myself. I became terrified and woke up my partner. Did you turn on my electric blanket? I asked him. No, I didn't even know these beds had electric blankets, he replied. Neither did I whispered. Something's turned on. I'm scared. Can I sleep with you? He nodded. We shared a single bed, and I was able to fall asleep again. In the morning, I asked my mother or father if they played a practical joke by turning on my electric blanket in the middle of the night. They said no. We immediately packed our bags and left the cottage. I had informed the owner about the dirty water in the jacuzzi incident. He suggested that I was lying by saying that it was impossible for the jacuzzi to have bad water. He explained that the bathroom was a recent development, only 18 months old, and had been installed with new pipes. He also said that the water source was the same throughout the cottage, and that if dirty water came out of the tap, it would come out of all, which was not the case. Needless to say, that cottage is no longer operating as a B&B. Thanks for reading. I'm a teaching assistant at Western Illinois University and have had some interesting run-ins with our departmental ghost. I've spent many late nights working on the top floor of Simpkins Hall and have experienced some interesting things. Doors that will stay open without any problems all day long will shut within 5 minutes after being open late at night. Windows that I've personally closed and secured have suddenly flown open, letting cold air fill the room before I can rush and reshut them. However, the strangest thing to ever even happen occurred very early this morning. After spending much of the night grading papers in the silent offices of the grad, I finally laid on the couch to get a couple of hours of sleep before I had to get up and teach. The entire night had been completely quiet, but as soon as I turned off the lights in the offices and positioned myself for sleep, the sound of an electric typewriter being slowly manipulated, as if by a Hunt and a Peck typist, broke the night's silence. I knew I was alone, and had been since midnight, and so I stood up to investigate. I had no sooner risen when the noise stopped. I stood by the couch within the returned silence for about a minute before lying back down. As I covered myself in my jacket for a blanket, the noise started once again. This time I remained horizontal on the couch and listened to the typing noise until I was sure that it was not the heating system and was indeed coming from the middle of the room and one of the other graduate students' office. Once again I arose, but this time I went to the circuit box and turned on the lights to investigate whether or not our prankster graduate assistant Dan Bender was fooling around. I went to the office from which the typing noise had originated, but there was no one there. After being satisfied that Dan was nowhere in the room, I turned off the lights and went back to the couch. Again, as soon as I had turned off the lights and settled down to sleep, the noise started. This time, I just called out, "Harold, knock it off, I need to get some sleep." Oddly enough, the sound stopped, and I was finally able to go to sleep. I have no idea why I called out the name Harold, but it was the first name that came to mind. Whatever the name of the Simpkin Hall ghost is, he quieted down when I told him to. Others have expressed fear about being alone in the building late at night, but if our building has a spectator, he is harmless despite his poltergeist pranks. Thanks for reading. This is a tale that happened to my friend Joe. There's a playhouse in our area that was once an old barn, but was made into a playhouse by a group of amateur actors. I've heard many stories about being haunted, and once when I was there, I had the chilly feeling that I was being watched and thought I saw a man in one of the windows watching me. But that is not the story I'm going to relate. One night, my friend Joe and one of his friends went up there late at night. They wanted to see some of the stuff that was inside, so they broke into the playhouse through a door in the back. I won't go into the legality of this action or the extent of my friend's morals, but I digress. While they were rummaging around through the stuff in the basement, they would not steal from the place, but breaking and entering was okay. Go figure. When they heard the sound of something being dragged across the floor upstairs, they were curious about the sound, so they went upstairs to investigate. When they got upstairs, they saw a trunk had been moved across the floor. They could tell because of a trail it made in the dust around it. They moved it back to make it look like it was a move, so no one would suspect their break-in. They went back downstairs to look around some more, and once again heard the sound of something being dragged across the floor upstairs. They went back upstairs and found the trunk had once again been moved. There were no footprints around it except the ones they made earlier. They moved it back once again and headed downstairs. As soon as they got downstairs, they heard the trunk moving again. This was the last straw, and they decided it was time to beat a hasty retreat. If anyone knows anything about the playhouse, it is called Crescent Lake Playhouse, or has any similar experiences, please post them. Thank you for reading. Hey guys, it's Phantom of Darkness here, and I just wanted to say thank you again for tuning in to the stories, the haunted stories of amazing proportions. And if you guys like this, I suggest you comment, like, share, and subscribe. I see my southern accent coming out a little bit, and if you guys from America understand what southern accent is, this is how we talk in the southern states of the United States. Even though I don't live there, but that's my southern accent. Yeah. I guess it's not really southern accent. I suck at southern accents, so don't even try to correct me because I know I'm wrong, but share this video anyway, guys, because it's amazing. Oh geez, I seriously don't know what I was trying to accomplish with that fake southern accent, which wasn't even a southern accent. Anyway guys, it's going to be a really busy week for me, so I don't know when I'm going to be able to get this video out. Obviously, if you're hearing right now, you're listening to the video right now, so you're going to hear it as soon as possible because this is the outro and you already got to it. But that being said, shooting for a Monday release, maybe late night, maybe early in the morning, I don't know, for Tuesday. We'll have to find out. But one thing is for certain, I keep stumbling upon my words. Not actually accidentally finding my words, because I never find my words, but I stumble upon them. Like, I guess I find them, and then they fall out of my mouth immediately. Okay, I don't even know what I'm talking about anymore. I'll see you guys later. I'm running on like 2 hours sleep. Well, it's not really 2, it's like 4. But still, not a lot of sleep. Good night, good morning. I love you guys, and I'll see you in the next video. Happy Thanksgiving, by the way, to all my American neighbors who are, well, I'm American. So, bye.